sit down and buckle up and get ready to think and to write. As we discuss what happened to the United States after the Revolutionary War. Now, obviously, we're after the Revolutionary War, so I'm not going to go up until modern day period, but I am going to go and deal with the political problems facing the New World, or facing this new country after winning their independence. And so why don't we begin where we left off in the last chapter, right? The wars ended because of this great thing called the Treaty of Paris of 1783. So what was the Treaty of Paris of 1783? It ended the war. It gave the United States victory, but this is very important. It promised all the land east of the Mississippi would be given to the United States, with the exception of Florida. Florida still belonged to the Spanish, and so they still own Florida, but the United States now owns all the land east of the Mississippi, and you should know those states because you've had a map quiz on them recently. Now, there are some deals made, right? First off, the British are going to remove all of their troops from east of the Mississippi. Now, they don't do that, right? That's one promise that's broken. The United States, the people of the United States, and the government of the United States has promised that they're going to repay loans that they owed to the British government prior to the war, right? So if citizens owned money to English bankers, any debt that the states owed to British bankers, those would be paid back, right? And there was some contention on that, but that was the deal, right? The war's over. United States, you won your independence. Here it is. Please make sure you pay back our people if you owe them money, and we'll remove all of their remove all the troops in your land. And did either side fulfill their bargain? Go ahead, answer as a class. What do you think? That's right. Actually, I have no clue what you said, but they did not. Neither side fulfilled their side of the bargain, which would cause a continual feud with these two nation states. Now, this is probably one of the more critical parts of American history, right? Because now that we won our independence, now what? What do we do now, right? That was a difficult question back then. Now, at the Second Continental Congress, right, when they developed a somewhat of a temporary government, it was called the Confederate. And I said temporary. They didn't see it as temporary. It was temporary. It was called the Articles of Confederation, right? Articles of Confederation, and this was and let me make this very clear, because this is kind of hard maybe for you to understand. You know, what document today tells the government what they're allowed to do and how they will function? That document is called the Constitution, right? The Constitution, this is before the Constitution, right? In 1781, the Constitution did not exist yet. It was called the Articles of Confederation. This document told the government, the federal government, how they could behave and what they could do. Very similar to our Constitution, and you'll see why the Articles of Confederation just doesn't work. So anyways, that's kind of what happens, right? So there's this document written that all 13 colonies, or all 13 states at this point, agree upon, and it's called the Articles of Confederation, okay? Now, each state under the Articles of Confederation is sovereign. And when I mean sovereign, I mean they can kind of do what they want. They can do what they want, they can do as they please, but they are softly united by this very, very, very small national government. Now, for seventh graders, understand. Ninth graders, I think you probably understand this. Seventh graders, you may not. There's different levels of government, right? At the top, you have the national government. Now, when I say at the top, I don't mean they're the guys in charge of everything, because that's not the case. They're in charge of some things, right? Not everything, but some things. Um, then you have your state government, who's in charge of most part what happens in the state. And then you have your local government, which is um, inferior to your state and national governments. But for the most part, to and you have to almost compare the two times maybe to get an understanding of the difference between the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation. Right? Today, under the Constitution, the national government and the state government just have what's called different jurisdiction, right? They have different areas in which they can govern. So it's like me and, let's say, Mr. Spencer. Now, Mr. Spencer and we have two different, we're sovereign over our two different areas, our jurisdiction. Now, because he's been here like a zillion years longer than me, because he's extremely old, um, he has a little bit more power and pull at Calvary than I do, right? Because I'm somewhat of I'm a really young, hip guy who's just been around for a little bit, whereas he is like a dinosaur. But so maybe that's not a good comparison of the Constitution, but the Articles of Confederation is this basically the national government can't get the states to do anything. So I really just I'm gonna stop trying to make comparisons. I'm gonna strictly focus on the Articles of Confederation. What I do want you to know for your notes is the Articles of Confederation is the first form of government in the United States. The Articles of Confederation is the first form of government in the U.S. Alrighty. Alright, so what did the Articles of Confederation look like? I'm going to tell you a little bit of what it looked like. It was what we call unicameral. That means it had one house. The national government had one house. Now each state had its own legislature, and it still does, right? That's still the same. But the national government, it barely existed. It had one tiny itty bitty teensy weensy house. Now the articles of the under the Articles of Confederation, the national government could really do nothing. They could barely, they could not tax, right? They could not enforce. They could not have a standing army. And what happens is they're extremely weak and unable to really get anything done. And so, because they're so incredibly weak, and I'm going to speak very generally, and I'll have you read your chapter to kind of get some of the more specifics. Um, but they're just, the Articles of Confederation are so incredibly weak, it doesn't allow the national government to really do what it needs to do. And understand why we need a national government. If you're going to have state governments, if you're going to be a united country, can you imagine if West Virginia had a different foreign policy than, let's say, Virginia? Now, foreign policy is, and when you think of a policy, what's a policy? Policy is kind of like a law, right? And foreign means outside the United States, so foreign policy is your law dealing with other countries. Can you imagine if West Virginia had a different foreign policy than Virginia? Right? It would be somewhat chaotic. Now imagine 50 different states having 50 different laws with every other country. Like it couldn't, a country can't function that way. Well, that's kind of what was happening, right? You had some colonies who were who had different rules and laws when it came to dealing with England than let's say the southern colonies. Um, can you imagine if each state had its own currency? Well, under the Articles of Confederation, each state did have its own currency. There was no unified currency. So when I say that the national government is weak under the Articles of Confederation, I mean they were weak, right? They couldn't. There was no monetary policy. There was no foreign policy. At one point, this is kind of interesting. This these pirates in and around the Mediterranean Sea, they kidnap a vessel, right? They kidnap a vessel of U.S. soldiers or U.S. merchants, and they hold them ransom. Now, the national government under the Articles of Confederation could not afford, I repeat, could not afford to pay the ransom. They basically said, I'm really sorry, we can't do anything for you. We are broke. Because again, the national government could not tax. If they wanted to spend money, they had to go to the states and go, oh, wonderful Virginia, could we have maybe $10 maybe to build a boat, please? To defend our country? And the states simply said no, we're not giving you any money. Most of the officials in the government during at the national level, the government barely had enough money to pay their salary. So when I say that they are, when I say it wasn't working, I mean it wasn't working. Man, I got this bottle of water that is like impossible to open. I'm like dying of thirst, and my wife bought these water bottles that are like warped top, so now it's just sitting in front of me, teasing me like I ate a mixed berry muffin. And it's just, I'm very upset because it looks very good and I want to drink it. But I have a cup with like kind of melted ice. I could do that. Woo! Choked on an ice cube. I heard you can't choke on an ice cube because it melts. I don't know if that's true. Anyways, I wouldn't test it. Okay, but I don't want to say that the Articles of Confederation produced nothing good, right? The national government under the Articles of Confederation did have some successes. So what I want to do in our notes, I want you to know that the Articles of Confederation was, one, America's first form of government. Two, I want you to know that it was very weak because it had no power. Okay? I'm going to deal more with their weaknesses, but I want to talk about some of the good things that they did. So, let's go ahead and cue some music for the good things they did. All right, some of the good things that the Articles of Confederation did do was how they dealt with what's called the Western lands. If you look at your book, I think this is the book you use, page 135. I'll give everyone a chance to look at your book on page 135. Right. If you look at page 135, you'll see that you'll see the states that are in blue, right? Those are called 13 states and Maine, right? If you look at the green states, it says the Northwest Territories. This is where they did well. They did very well in dealing with the Northwest Territory. Now, this may not seem like a big deal to you, but believe it or not, it really was a big deal, because the question is, how are we going to develop and govern this Northwest Territory that was given to us because it's east of the Mississippi? Dimitri, what document allowed or gave the United States the lands east of the Mississippi? Go ahead, answer. Did he get it right? Okay. Well, you okay. So I'll just say, good job, Dimitri. So there we go. We have this. Is the Articles of it is the Treaty of Paris, 1783. So if you look at this map on 135, you'll see these. I forgot. This is also for seventh graders. Seventh graders. Sydney, what is the you answer? Okay, maybe she got it right. Hopefully, I just said the answer right. All right. So the Northwest, these Western lands, these Northwest territory, right? This is the question is how are we going to develop it? So there are a couple different things that were done. Now, seventh graders, you do not need to know what you don't need to know the first one, right? Which is called the Ordinance of 1784. You can call it the Northwest Ordinance 1784, that's fine. But it's called the Ordinance of 1784, and it's written by Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson comes up with this idea of what to do with the Northwest Territory. This little green, please have out your book or look at your friend's book, the green area on page 135. Now, he had a couple different ideas. He said, okay, we should create 10 states out of the territory, and each would be completely equal to all the other states in the Union. So there's no second, there's no state that's less important. And he also proposed banning slavery in the region and giving the land to settlers instead of selling it. So this is pretty important. Again, seventh graders, you don't need to know this part. Ninth graders, you do. Thomas Jefferson kind of set the precedent, right? He kind of set the tone for what to do with it. Now, his idea would be rejected, but he set the tone. It's muy importante, right? So he says we're going to ban slavery in the region. We're going to make 10 states out of it, and we're going to give the land away rather than sell it. So he wasn't trying to make money off of it. Now, they reject it. For multiple reasons. One, people thought 10 states would be too much. Secondly, some were very uncomfortable with banning slavery. So, too far-sighted. So then they, a year later, would pass a far more cautious bill or law. It was called the Land Ordinance of 1785. Seventh graders, you do need to know this. The Land Ordinance of 1785. Now, this was a success, right? This is a success. The national government, under the Articles of Confederation, that was weak, powerless, penniless, and just pathetic, they actually did something, right? So here we go. What did it do? Okay, it didn't really concentrate on political questions such as like what do we do with slavery. It dealt with how to divide up the land or how to settle the land. Maybe is the better way to put it. How are we going to get it settled? So what it would do, and so seventh graders, that's all you need to know, right? The Land Ordinance 1785. All it did, and what you need to know in your notes, is it helped. It was its goal was to try to say, okay, how are we going to get people to this Northwest Territory? How are we going to promote it? And what are we going to do with this land once people get there, right? So just keep that in mind. So now, ninth graders, I want you to know more of the details of this. So what did the Land Ordinance 1785 actually say? It said that each township contained, or excuse me, let me go back for a second. The ordinance divided the new lands into orderly townships for sale and development, right? So that means it just broke it down into large, it broke it down into sections, right? And in each, in fact, you can see a really good example on this on page 136, right? The Land Ordinance of 1785. So it's gonna break it down into these giant blocks, so to speak, multiple blocks, and it's going to break it up into townships, and each township is going to contain 36 sections or lots, and that's, as your book mentions, that's 640 acres, and each lot was to be sold for $1, right? So you could sell an acre for $1, which, by the way, today is that's like unheard of, crazy, right? So, um, so all the proceeds from the sale of these lots would go towards building and maintaining schools or public buildings in the area. So basically, that's what the land ordinance did, right? It said, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to create a township. We're going to cut it up into a bunch of blocks, and we're going to sell each acre for $1. You can see a kind of a neat example of it here on page 136. Please read it. Okay. So there's one more success. The other success was the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Seventh graders, you need to know this. Obviously, ninth graders, you do too. So the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 dealt with some of the more practical and governmental issues that they were going to have. It basically set up a pathway to statehood, and in fact, that's a really good way to kind of word it. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 set up a pathway to statehood. Purred. All right. The first stage, right, the region remained almost completely under the direct control of the federal government. So the first stage was you belong, or the land, not you as people, but the land belongs to the national government. Okay? Now, when a region had at least 5,000 free inhabitants, right? When a region had at least 5,000 free inhabitants, it could enter to the second stage and become what's known as a territory. So if you got 5,000 people, free people, you could become a territory. Now, when you have a territory, that means you can have a local legislature, right? You can have a local legislature. So you can start to self-govern at this point. Now, you're still under the national government, but you have a little bit more leeway to kind of self-govern, kind of determine what your little territory wants to do. Now, once a territory had 60,000 free inhabitants, once a territory had 60,000 free inhabitants, 60,000 free inhabitants, it could draw up a state constitution and be admitted to the Union on an equal base with every other state. So it could be equal, right? So it's simply as simple as this, right? Once you got 60,000, you can enter into the third stage, which is now you can become a state. That's basically it, right? That's what the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 did. I hope that makes sense. Okay. Now, these are the good things, right? How they dealt with the Northwest Territory was probably the only good thing they actually did. Now, some of the failures of the Confederation. Now, I'm going to talk about the failures of the Confederation, so if you want to mark that in your notes, go ahead and do that now. The failures of the Confederation. Okay, so the first thing is it failed to have good money policy. What I mean by that is every state had its own currency. I kind of mentioned this, right? Every state had its own currency. That's number one. And the national government was printing what's called soft money. Now, we use soft money today. This is like paper money. And back then, they started using paper money because they didn't have enough gold or silver. Those things are what are called hard money. They didn't have enough gold or silver to pay for things. So they said, well, why don't we just print what are called promissory notes? We'll print a piece of paper that says we promise to give you something back for this. And that's what they would end up doing. But the problem is it would cause what's called inflation. But we don't need to go on to that. Just know that they had horrible monetary policy. Horrible monetary policy. And it was creating massive amount of debts with the states. massive amount of debts with the states, and um, also really the national government as well. There were foreign weaknesses, and this is because they were not dealing well with every state. Um, kind of do what they wanted to. That with as far as foreign nations, there was nothing in the Articles of Confederation that said that states could not deal with foreign nations differently, and so that's exactly what states did. One state might be very friendly with England, maybe not putting a tariff, which is a tax on imported goods, on British goods. One state might, and it caused bitterness between states in amongst the 13 states. But also, as I mentioned, the Barbary pirates in northern Africa, near the Mediterranean or on the Mediterranean, they were harassing U.S. merchants, so that also was a major problem. Finally, the domestic weakness. This is number 3. So the first one was economic or monetary failure, monetary weakness. Second was foreign weaknesses. Some of these I already mentioned. This one I didn't. The domestic weaknesses, and this is probably one of the it's probably the biggest deal, right? And we're almost done actually. So I know we've kind of gone pretty fast, and but anyways, the domestic weakness was this. There was a lot of economic confusion, as I mentioned. You have 14 different currencies, one for each state, and then one for the national government. Each state has their own tariff rules. No one's getting along. It's just an absolute mess. Nothing's getting done. In 1783, right, 2 years after the Articles of Confederation was passed, and right after the end of the war, many generals were very frustrated. They were frustrated because the Congress's inability to pay them as they were promised. So soldiers were paid to fight, and they weren't getting their money. Right now, and so this created some of the generals saw all of this happening and were very frustrated. It was called the Newborough Conspiracy, right? And the officers intended to force Congress and the states to grant them their back pay. And the conspirators wanted to do more. They actually would go and get George Washington in the secret of night, right? And they would say, George Washington, could you let's go, let's take over the government, and we'll establish you as king and you as dictator. They actually told George Washington this, and George Washington, when he was confronted with his fellow generals, actually cried as they told him this. And according to records, he took off some glasses that he had because he was an older man at this point, and he basically said, all that we fought for, this is what it's come to. So he has this chance to become dictator, and he passes it down. He says, "No thanks. We fought for something greater. We fought for this idea. Let's go capture the idea. Let's fix the problem rather than panic and become some sort of tyrannical government." So, but this isn't. I don't want to stop there because there's a much bigger issue at hand. And this is more of a serious problem. In Massachusetts in 1786, a large body of men actually took up arms against the government. His name, the leader of this guy, of the group, was called Daniel Shays. Okay, and he was a veteran of the Revolutionary War, who was leading an insurrection of farmers against the courts of the western part of the state. Now, the farmers had purchased land at inflated prices. But here, let me make this, maybe try to make it more simple. A a bunch of soldiers were promised to be paid by the U.S. government for fighting in the Revolutionary War, right? They were promised to be paid. Well, here's the thing. The government gave them worthless paper money, right? They paid them in what were called continental bucks or continental dollars, which were just pieces of paper. Imagine this. Imagine if I said, I'm going to pay you for every A you get, or I'm going to pay you for every time you come and you sit and listen to my class. And then I paid you in berry bucks, which was a piece of paper with my goofy looking face on the front of it, right? You would be highly upset that that's what I gave you, because that's not what I promised you, right? I promised I'd pay you. So you assume that what I would pay you would be something of value. And these soldiers who went and fought, who gave up a portion of their life to go fight for their country, to be free, after the war, they were given worthless paper money. And many of them, therefore, could not pay the banks to keep their land. And so the banks started coming and repossessing or taking back land that these soldiers had purchased. So it's kind of like many of your parents, right, will take out a loan to buy a house. Imagine if they take out a loan to buy a house because their employers are supposed to pay them, and their employers paid them in berry bucks. What would happen to your house? It would be taken back by the bank, because the bank doesn't take berry bucks. They should take berry bucks, but they don't. And it would cause so all of this, not paying soldiers with real money, a bunch of soldiers losing their property and land despite fighting and dying for their country. This would create what was called Shays' Rebellion. And it was looking very obvious that the Articles of Confederation was inadequate, and it was going to be a catastrophe, and the country was looking like it wasn't going to hold, that it was going to break before it really got off the ground. And so by 1787, the United States realized we got to do something. And so that's where I'm going to stop. Ninth graders, I want you to read the chapter. I know you don't want to read the chapter, and you're going to try to not read the chapter. Please read the chapter and get some of the details from your book. I'm going to quiz you on it as if you did read it, so you will need to know and do the section quiz on page 138. Seventh graders, I want you also to read your chapter, not just up until the section quiz. I want you to read the whole chapter, and I want you to do the first section quiz you come across, or the section review, whatever it's called. And to all the classes, please turn your homework into the correct tray. Ninth graders, it's the second tray. Seventh graders, it's the third tray. Thank you so much. Have a great day.